Thank you, Leela. Thank you, Mark. I think you would all agree that we've heard two very different but equally fascinating, one focusing on the detail of North Korea, China, one focusing on the broader picture in that sense, but complementing each other in many ways. And now I think we have a little bit of a time for some exchanges. So I would suggest that if you have a comment, please keep it short, sharp. If you have a question, the same. Identify yourself, and then we'll try and get the speakers to respond to it. So, yeah. So.
Thank you, Rakesh. I'm going to talk about these
Can you
topics.
identify
I'm
yourself?
Sanat Kaul, and this is regarding the topic of today's discussion, strategic stability in the Indo-Pacific. Now, we've discussed a lot about Pacific. Although we did not discuss China's role in South China Sea, the 9 dashed lines, and things like that. However, since it is Indo-Pacific, we come across the other side of Malacca Straits, and we have Bay of Bengal, which is an area of peace. All maritime agreements are signed up between India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, everything. Even joint agreements are signed up. It's an area of peace. Joint patrolling is going on. Now, in that context, what is the role of the Indo side when also we feel that it's not sufficient? There are Chinese incursions taking place in the Bay of Bengal through the 10-degree channel between Andaman and Nicobar Islands of submarines. We insist that in the EEZ, the flag must show, but it doesn't. And we know, we are aware of this. Is there a need for India to do something more to keep its defenses up and to make sure that it doesn't become another area of conflict, which is happening in the South China Sea? May I have a comment on that? Thank you.
Yeah. We'll take 3-4 questions and then.
Okay, I'm General Chopra. I'm a happy platinum veteran. Starting with Mark, he talked of DPRK and China, and my first exposure was in '62 with China, first of my 4 wars. My short question on DPRK. After the recent missile tests, the strategy seems to be to impose even more sanctions, then engage with them, and finally a dialogue. I'd like your comments as to the prospects of this strategy, particularly, are there any prospects, or do you think there are prospects? But my major issue, Chairman, is on this Indo-Pacific. You yourself mentioned Asia, because the landmass is involved. I think there would be more focus if you said Indo-Asia Pacific. Nonetheless, what I want to know from the panel, perhaps from Ms. Leela, that the stability or the volatility as being talked about is happening because the US has given the impression that they're certainly weaning away from West Asia, but that's not the subject today. No mention of Afghanistan and Trump's yesterday's speech. What I want to know is that are we going to see diminishing role of the US, notwithstanding what the bureaucracy is going to do, and greater regional cooperation in this region, especially since Leela yourself pointed out that there is no security architecture. So I'd like comments on this also, please. Thank you, Chairman.
The person to your right.
Yes, I am Atul. I am from corporate world. My question to Mark. Mark, you dealt, very lucidly about North Korea and China while, discussing about the topic of the day. However, I find that Pakistan is mirror image of North Korea. And Pakistan is mirror image of North Korea. Have you left giving a mention of Pakistan even once by choice or by chance? That's all.
The lady at the back. There's a lady yeah.
Thank you. I would like to hear the panel's opinion about the prospects of a no first use policy. China and India, the two major powers, have no first use policy. What are your views about a global no first use policy for strategic stability in the region? Thank you.
Surendra Kumar, former Indian ambassador. My first question is to you, Rakesh. Is strategic stability in Indo-Pacific really a desirable, realistic goal? And I know you know why I'm asking this. My second question is to Mark. Sir, during your presentation, you talked about North Korea has drawn wrong conclusion that if they have nuclear weapons, US might have not really invaded them. But I'm asking you, just hypothetically, if Iraq did have as many nuclear weapons as Pakistan has, do you think US would have still invaded Iraq? Thirdly, you said China has not helped North Korea in nuclear sort of arsenals, but do you think Pakistan has? I have read somewhere Pakistan has been helping North Korea in their nuclear sort of pursuit. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll, if you can keep it short, then we'll get another round in.
Is that okay? Okay. First, Sanat's question. What do we need to do in the Bay of Bengal? You're absolutely right. And I think the signs of increased external activity in the Bay of Bengal have been evident, I would say, for a couple of decades. In my remarks, I mentioned that India has been a comparative latecomer to recognizing its naval interests. You're aware, having served in the islands, in the Andaman Islands, of the creation of the Andaman and Nicobar Command. Yes, you look skeptical about it, and I think it is still settling in. I think the intent is there, but obviously a lot more needs to be done. The Bay of Bengal, in fact, is the route for when China entered the Indian Ocean. And it entered it a few years in advance of when it was expected to do so, on the basis of anti-piracy operations against the Somalian pirates. And it has never gone back. In fact, I think they have built up their presence, and they recognize that it's not just a question of the Somalian anti-piracy operations, but now their active interest in the development of Gwadar, as well as their involvement with Iran. So there's no question that China has established its presence in the Indian Ocean region. And this is why I spoke of really the maritime continuum that we need to address, however much one might quibble about the terms. India needs to do very much more with regard to its naval capabilities. And in terms of the articulation and the joint vision statement that was signed with President Obama when he was last here, it relates really to India's interests in terms of the freedom of navigation through the South China Sea as well. I think one way of also doing it would be enhancing actual land-based or multimodal connectivity with parts of Southeast Asia. You might be aware of the trilateral highway through Myanmar into northern Thailand. What this should result in, and this was a project that got initiated when I was ambassador in Thailand, it should result in connectivity between Port Okha, which is our westernmost point, and Da Nang on the South China Sea. Because Thailand has its highway extended eastward into northern Laos and into Vietnam. That would be true connectivity. Equally, with regard to the Bay of Bengal, you talked of the 10-degree channel. There have been plans, and I believe they are being pursued now, for the development of Dawai port in Myanmar, by which you could have maritime transport across the Bay of Bengal to Dawai, which would then connect by road into Kanchanaburi, bridge on the river Kwai, that's the town for the Kwai, in Thailand, highway to Bangkok, Gulf of Thailand, South China Sea. And the third, which is talked about extensively but has not really taken off. In fact, I think it's been talked about from the time of Suez and Panama, when they were first conceptualized, is across the Kra Isthmus between Thailand and Malaysia. Now, I don't see a canal ever coming up there for a variety of economic and political reasons. But a land bridge should be feasible, which again would then connect the Andaman Sea with the Gulf of Thailand and onto the South China Sea. Land bridge, rail, road, pipeline. I think this would really give substance to the security in and around the Bay of Bengal. I think General Chopra had a question with regard to whether there would be a decreased role for the United States. I think maybe Mark should answer that. Yeah. But let me just say that I think amidst all this discussion about the enhancement of China's capabilities or India's perceptions, let us not underestimate the resolve of the United States, particularly with regard to their naval presence. This is something that I once saw Admiral Zlatopar when he was heading the Pacific Command. He spoke at the National Defense College. There was no speech. He just demonstrated the location of American ships. And that said it all. So, no, I don't see any diminishing of that role. The question really is America's political will. Does it see itself as an Asian power? We heard of Guam when you spoke about North Korea. And to me, if one really thinks strategically across a century, when the United States incorporated Hawaii as its 50th state, what did it mean for the law of the sea? What did it mean for territorial waters and the EEZ? Likewise, if something similar is done with regard to Guam, it brings America right up into Asian waters in terms of international law. So I don't see America going away anywhere in terms of the Pacific Ocean. The political will really is the question.
So just to follow up on that, next time a U.S. admiral gives a speech by just pointing out where all the ships are, it's going to be a longer speech because there's going to be more ships. Donald Trump just put forward a budget that calls for an increase both in soldiers and ships and other forms of military hardware. Well, Guam is U.S. territory, but it's America's willingness, as expressed by Donald Trump, to come to the support of its allies in Asia that I don't think is diminishing. I mean, he said this with regard to the Senkaku Islands, which Japan administers, that this would fall under the U.S.-Japan Security Alliance. So I say this with more hopefulness than certainty, but let's be hopeful tonight. I got a few questions about North Korea and Pakistan. Mr. Kumar, I don't know if the United States would have invaded Iraq if Saddam Hussein had had nuclear weapons, but I will say this. I don't think he would have been allowed to have nuclear weapons. I think the invasion would have happened when the United States got good intel that he was spurring to get the nuclear weapons, then they would have taken him out. Now, the same won't happen in North Korea. Well, they already have nuclear weapons for the reasons that I said. Pakistan did help North Korea's nuclear weapons program. That's a matter of record. Benazir Bhutto traded some centrifuges of a second-generation variety for Pakistani North Korean missiles, the Nodong equivalents, which Pakistan then renamed. But this was in the 1990s. And there was probably some continuing support in the next decade. I'm not sure about that, but I haven't seen any evidence within about the last 15 years of Pakistani support to North Korea's nuclear weapons program. I was going to challenge Mr. Atul's image, statement that Pakistan is a mirror image of North Korea. But then I got to thinking about fun factory mirrors, fun house mirrors where everything is distorted. And so in a way, I suppose one could see, there are a lot of similarities. I mean, poor China, their two allies are these two failing states of North Korea and Pakistan. I guess I left it out by choice because I only had 15 minutes. I could talk about it for hours. When you buy my book about Asia's latent nuclear powers, you can also buy my book about Pakistan's nuclear program, in which I went through all the different ways that Pakistan presents nuclear dangers, including the prospect for nuclear terrorism. But I said that Pakistan understands the threat from nuclear terrorism. What they don't understand too well, I think, is the potential for a nuclear exchange, the potential for a conflict that starts with a Pakistani sort of sponsored or at least some Pakistani origin terrorism in Indian territory, as has happened in the past. And then there's a response by India, and then Pakistan responds with a tactical nuclear weapon, and then India responds with massive nuclear retaliation. That would create a devastating dark cloud around the world that could put 2 billion people at risk. How to deal with these kind of threats. So in the North Korean case, yes, the United States is going to apply a lot more sanctions, a lot more pressure, and hope that this will force North Korea to cry uncle and to give up its nuclear program, but they're not going to because they think that nuclear weapons are needed to protect them, and they'll just tighten their belts. They might be willing to accept some moratorium on missile testing, which wouldn't be bad, but that's not what we need. We need denuclearization. I think this strategy of putting more sanctions on has a secondary objective, which is to help to create conditions in North Korea that eventually will lead to the collapse of the system and a reunification under Seoul leadership. As for non-first use policy, it contributes to stability to the extent that it is deemed credible. Now, I think most observers would say that India's NFU policy is credible. They're a little more skeptical about China, and they were very skeptical when the Soviet Union had a no first use policy, which later documents showed it was totally false. It was a pretense. It didn't contribute to stability at all. I don't see any other of the nuclear armed states moving toward the policy that India and China espouse. It's just people don't. It's not viewed in the United States anyway as such an important contribution. But maybe this is a need for an Indian nuclear missionary role to persuade states.
Okay. I'll deal with that bilaterally.
KP Nair, I work for the Telegraph, but I'm not here as media. I am here because of my associations with IISS. My question is to you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. In India, we are currently going through a resurgence of nationalism, which in populist perception, not in popular perception, in populist perception, makes India the center of the world. So all that you said about North Korea and China, does it pose any threat to India? What impact does it have on India? And on a broader plane, does East Asia pose any threat to India at all?
My question is to Mark. You seem to be too optimistic about Donald Trump's future policies, which nobody in the world seems to be certain about it. Europe doesn't know what his policy is going to be to Russia and the rest of the world. In the subcontinent also, the Pakistanis who were earlier frontline state, of America, they don't know what his policy is going to be there. India, now, there was a strategic stability sought to be evolved by India, America, and Japan in this area, a bit of a counterbalance to Chinese influence in the region. Now, here is President Donald Trump. He says there is one China. Earlier he said two Chinas. Where does he stand? Now, is the second statement which he has made about two Chinas, is he going to strike a deal with Chinese? How will it affect Japan? How will it affect India? Has he given thought to it? Don't you are relying on bureaucracy too much to change a president like Donald Trump?
Professor Anita Inder Singh. My question is for Mr. Fitzpatrick. The Americans have an anti-missile system in South Korea. How have North Korea and China reacted to it? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal. I'm with IDSA. Two short questions, both for Mark. Firstly, Mark, as we know, that strategic stability comprises three main components: deterrent stability, crisis stability, and arms race stability. You haven't spoken about arms race. Do you think Pakistan is engaged in an arms race with India as far as strategic stability and nuclear issues are concerned? And second question is regarding your writings or your articles on a new normal Pakistan. Could you please elaborate and explain to us how this is to be brought about? A new normal Pakistan? Thank you.
I'm Dr. Tasleem Rahmani from Mission Weekly. I have two apprehensions which I want Ms. Leela to address them. After this West China and Gwadar port, the CPEC agreement, and the increased activity at the other side in the South China Sea, our security, the strategic stability is not being compromised just because of our more soft emotions towards United States, number one. Number two, last year, there was an alliance, the military alliance has been announced to counter the terrorism by Saudi Arabia, having 35 countries, Muslim countries. And most of these Muslim countries are here. In Pakistan is there, Maldives is there, and then Indonesia and Malaysia, all these things. So don't you think, and now the Saudi king is here with 1,500 odd delegation in the same region, in Malaysia, in Indonesia, Brunei, and going to China, and so the changing political equations in Asia, don't you see that we have a bigger threat ahead because of such military alliances, etc., and increased terrorism and activity in South China Sea at one end, and then Gwadar port activity at the other end? Thank you.
Ravi, I'm a veteran from the Navy. In real terms, what role do you expect for Indian Navy in the South China or the East China Sea? Won't it be overstretching its potential for expecting any more than showing a flag or carrying out joint exercises? Thank you.
You know, we've got too many hands up, so I'm afraid we'll have to. Will you give the phone? Will you give the mic on that side?
I'm Group Captain Hirani. I have a question to the panel. Two of the major sources of instability in the region are interstate competition and challenges to free trade. They have both major consequences for the region. What do you feel is the way ahead? More so because of the competition in the region in terms of the security dilemma, that one country's defenses lead to the other country's chain reaction in terms of getting into arms purchase. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. One last question from that side of the room.
Yeah, my name is Rajiv Sharma. I'm an independent journalist. Just a one-liner question to the panelists. How America walking away from TPP will impact on strategic stability in the Indo-Pacific?
Okay. I think we need to close because otherwise we will be cutting into the time for the panelists. You want to go first, Leela?
Maybe I should. Yeah,
Okay, go ahead, Mark. I think they were more directed to you anyway.
Yeah, the first ones anyway were. So not every problem in every place in the world affects all the other countries of the world. So the question was, how does a North Korea problem affect India? Well, there's one very specific way it does, and then several indirect ways which have to do with where there's instability and war fighting. It affects the price of oil and the price of trade and so forth. So that's an indirect. But the direct one is that one of the most serious problems that North Korea may pose is its willingness to sell anything to anybody. And anything might be nuclear weapons, and the anybody might be terrorist groups. On 2 occasions in the past, North Korean diplomats have threatened, threatened by saying, we could supply nuclear weapons to terrorist groups, but we won't if you treat us well. So that's one way. Yeah, I was too optimistic about Trump, I agree. Well, what the heck? I thought you wanted optimism tonight, but you seem to want pessimism. Will Trump strike a deal with China? I worried about this. When he called the Taiwanese president right away and got the Taiwanese so excited and happy, and then 2 days later he said, yeah, we could maybe make a deal on one China policy and pull the rug out from under the Taiwanese, made everybody wonder your question, is he going to strike a deal? What's he willing to do? This is where the bipolar nature of U.S. foreign policy comes into play. Because he can't do this by himself. He needs bureaucrats. And as a former bureaucrat, let's stick up for bureaucrats, eh? And they need to carry out these things, and they need to carry out deals. And I don't think they're going to strike a stupid deal. I hope not. They have to negotiate it. Okay. The U.S. anti-missile system in the Republic of Korea certainly has created a lot of anxiety in North Korea and in China. Amazing. I just read an editorial in Global Times, one of the English language newspapers, and it said that China's response to the South Korean missile defense should be as severe as their response to North Korea for its offensive missile systems. And I'm thinking, hold on a minute, this isn't fair. South Korea's missile defense is defensive. North Korea's are offensive. Why would China have to get so upset? They think that the radar in South Korea will peer into China and obviate China's strategic forces? No. We can deal with that. Let's have some transparency. The United States has offered transparency and has offered to make sure that the radar doesn't point into China. We'll welcome Chinese observers to come to the site. There are ways of dealing with this. China doesn't have to bully South Korea so much over THAAD. What they're really worried about is U.S. global missile defense, and that THAAD is one small part of that. Oh, I'm so glad that you read my articles about the new normal China, new normal Pakistan. No, normalizing Pakistan's nuclear program is the way I put it. And my argument, which may not find favor with every single one of you, or maybe not with a single person, my argument was that Pakistan presents a lot of problems in the nuclear area. And one way of trying to get Pakistan to be a better citizen in terms of its nuclear posture is to offer it an inducement, to offer it a path forward that would legitimize its nuclear program. And I used the phrase which got me in a lot of trouble in this capital. I said they should be offered nuclear legitimacy akin to India's. Well, that got me in big trouble. By akin to India's, I didn't mean the exact same deal that India got, because the deal for Pakistan would be a lot tougher, because Pakistan's record is so much worse. Pakistan would have to do a lot more to get a deal. But I just thought that offering Pakistan the prospect for a deal, if they cleaned up their act, would be a better way of getting them to behave better in the nuclear realm. I couldn't understand all of the questions, so I'm going to stop right here, even though I know I didn't answer them all. Can you take over?
Yeah.
Arms race stability.
I have a question for Mark.
We can discuss, you can discuss that.
No. It is just a very quick one where earlier you had said that Pakistan understands the threat of nuclear terrorism. Mark had commented that Pakistan understands the threat of nuclear terrorism. Now that's a slightly qualified statement because it raises questions about other forms of terrorism as well. And I think the understanding that many analysts of the Pakistan state or establishment have, and I'm not just talking about Indians, this includes Pakistanis, is that there are inherent contradictions within the Pakistani system itself, which would call that into question. So could you help us understand exactly why you have this confidence?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I'll answer the other questions. KP, your question, was that for Mark, or may I comment on it as well? About whether there is any threat to India from East Asia. Well, East Asia is dominated by China, and I think I spoke fairly extensively about the Chinese, the extent of Chinese strategic presence all across the continent. So I think the answer would be yes. Also, comes down to a definition of our maritime interests. So much of India's trade goes through the South China Sea. Freedom of navigation matters. It isn't just a question of the growing trade with East Asia, but also with the west coast of the United States. So to that extent, India is directly interested, it's a directly interested party in the safety of navigation through the South China Sea. Mr. Rahmani, I couldn't quite get your question. I think you talked of developments in the region, the Saudi king traveling to Southeast Asia and so on, and does this not represent an increased threat?
Do you feel that we are squeezed by the Chinese lobby and then the Muslim lobbies of the world?
Well, it really depends on how you define your security interests and the resources and the capacities that you put into it. And I think this is something where India has sort of been a hesitant player. We have allowed our civilizational identity to prevail over our political identity, which is why many of our economists, brilliant as they are, continue to have a guns and butter debate. It's only now that I think, thanks to many of you represented here, that India's security interests are in fact being pinpointed, identified, and the flexibility that is required in order to deal with them developing within our own system. The gentleman there in the corner talked about the arms race and challenges to free trade. I didn't quite get what your question was, but okay. And the last one, Mr. Rajiv Sharma, US walking away from TPP. Absolutely, it just totally opens the door for China to redefine trading patterns in the Pacific. I think this is an evolving situation. I mean, earlier when you had the TPP taking shape, and you had the RCEP in terms of what East Asia and ASEAN were doing, there were questions asked about whether they were mutually exclusive. And at that time, my perception was that this was still an evolving picture. We still have to see the end of it. And I think here again, with regard to TPP, President Trump might have walked away from it as is. It continues to be under negotiation. Let us remember that. And trade negotiations are tortuous. You're dealing with thousands of tariff lines. You're dealing with very complex trading relations. In fact, trade was the last of the post-World War II structures that got put in place. And it took all the way up to 1995 when the WTO was born. So I don't think we've seen the end of this yet.
If I respond to Leela's question, does she have a right of reply? To
No.
Okay, good. So, Of course, Pakistan understands nuclear terrorism because they want to protect their own nuclear facilities and weapons. And they have gotten advice from the United States, and they understand the threat, and they've taken a lot of steps to protect their nuclear weapons. They also understand, your question was about terrorism in general. Don't they understand? I think Pakistan understands the threat to Pakistan from terrorism, and they've taken steps to reduce that threat from the Pakistan Taliban. But what they don't get, and I think this is your point, they don't understand that by fomenting or by assisting or somehow contributing to terrorism in India, that they contribute to a dynamic that can lead to a nuclear exchange. That's my fundamental concern. And yes, Pakistan is engaged in an arms race, a nuclear arms race with India. And the more fissile material, the more nuclear weapons they produce, the more danger there is in every regard. I wish they would stop the arms race. I wish that India would engage with Pakistan on talks to reduce nuclear risks and the nuclear arms race.
Well, thanks very much to our two speakers. I'm going to speak very briefly by way of making a vote of thanks. This has been an excellent climax to the IISS ORF interaction in a private session earlier on today, and in this very wide-ranging discussion with our eminent speakers this evening. It does seem to me that this is a time of extraordinary flux. Flux because of emerging and rising powers, flux because of the speed at which changes are happening, flux because of changes in the ruler of the President of the United States. And there are certainly issues that arise in relation to respect for old conventions or the rule of law, and there are issues, big issues, in connection with the fraying, I think the word has been used, of the nuclear order as it has been to date. I think one of the big questions, to which I don't think there is an answer, but certainly it's out there, you know, with a prize-winning essay to be produced at some stage, and that is about stability. Is stability desirable? It seems to me that stability has to be desirable. How you achieve that is a different matter. So let me close on that and say very many thanks to our two eminent speakers who've given us lots to think about, and thanks too to all those who've asked questions and even to those who weren't able to ask questions but have participated. This has been an excellent event, and my hearty thanks to you and also to ORF in hosting this, co-hosting this with IISS. Can we have a round of appreciation, please?